G'day and welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today we're going to take this opportunity to do a little interlude on our season. I think it's part way through our season. We've actually had a long dry summer and then just like we used to when I was a kid, or back not a kid, when I was first driving cars, so 35 years ago, thereabouts, we've had a fair bit of rain. So we've in the late February, early March was the storm time back then. Well, that's what's actually happened right now. So good soaking rain, so good for the country, that side of things. Nice wet ground everywhere. So like I said, good for the country, not so much for our ELR shooting. So at the moment we've got an interlude in that and we're halfway through a few projects. So I just wanted to stop and really talk about how that's going and talk about some other bits and pieces as well. So what have we done over this season? In front of us is pretty much what we've been up to. In the 6.5 gap, we introduced a 6mm, which is this cartridge next to it. Did a little bit of testing with 6.5, but really have moved over to the 6mm at the moment and found very good results, and was planning to go out to extreme long range and actually try it at 2 miles. A little bit on the bigger picture, which I'll explain, but that's what we're planning to. We obviously need a very dry paddock to even attempt that. So whether that happens this season or not, we'll know over the next month as to whether the ground is going to dry out again, or that's one for next year. And the other scale of things, we had one crack with our new 50 BMG bullet, or the 50 cal bullet. We had one crack with that, went really well, really happy with it. Where we were shooting out at 3,800 yards. We didn't hit steel, but it started to group really nicely. There's another little process I'm up to with that, and the simple bit what I'm talking about there, another part of the equation. But the next step is actually to try some large rifle primers in the 50 BMG. Just as our next bit of testing, they're expensive bullets. It takes a lot of effort for setup. We have very limited time, so I try and do as many big steps as I can, but that's the next one. But very happy with the bullet, working really nicely. Really in the same rifle, different barrel, the 416 we introduced this season, and that went really, really well. Really happy with it. It's in the same scope of things of what we're actually doing, and test really well. That one was the same sort of distance, 3,800 yards, put a hole through steel. Want to do the same thing with it, and that's where that large rifle primer idea works from. And there's a couple of ways we're going to do that. We're making up some little adapters to go into the normal Barrett brass we're using, or the pool brass, or whatever we end up using on that score. But we're we have some RCC brass that we've also done, and there's a little bit more we've got to do there. We've got to do some fire forming and things to make it all work. But functioning really well, and really happy with how that one's shooting. So that's that. In the middle is the other bit that we're doing, which was we introduced or did using the Gareth Crooks or GCPD chassis, awesome chassis system with a nice heavy barrel just on a Remington 700 long action, and introduced the 300 PRC, which worked really nicely and found quite interesting. And I suppose there I'll stop and I'll come back to the 300 PRC in just a second. But a little bit of what I'm actually up to this season, apart from trying these new rounds and wanted to introduce that chassis and what the great work they're doing there. A little bit of carrying on with bits and pieces that we sort of have been up to last season as well. But what I'm really up to is sort of coming down to try and find to a degree what I think is the ideal ELR/ULR cartridge, which there's a lot involved with that. You know, if you're trying to shoot 3 miles, then you've really got to go with the bigger ones, but really that's a very, very small and specific group of people. That the truth of it is, and I'll start to go into that as I divulge more of this sort of stuff or go through and analyse it further, is that those really big cartridges, really big rifles, there's negatives attached to that stuff as well. In the real ultra long range, like I said, 3 miles, well listen, you're stuck in that place. That's where you got to go. You've got a lot of energy to get out there, and get out there with accuracy, I should say. But if we come back into what is normal ultra long range for most people, still a ridiculously long shot in the 2 mile sort of things, so probably in the 3,000 to 3,500 and a bit more, maybe up to 4,000 yards. In that sort of range there, I think there's, well, as you'd see on our channel, there's a fair few cartridges that can get out there. The smallest I've taken there is the 6.5, which we didn't get on steel, but given the conditions of the day and the process we're at with testing and that sort of stuff, first time we'd really been shooting the 156 grain burgers, it still performed very well. We could go back and do that, but in the scheme of testing how small you can go and still be consistent, that's what the 6mm is about, so that's what the test is about there. In showing what it takes to get the big ones on, it's not just get a Biff 50 BMG and hit the target. The process that I've been going through is quite involved to try and get it to get onto target and be consistent just over 2 miles. And yet, from the 338 to the 300 Win Mag, which is this one here, to the 7mm Rem Mag, we've got on target pretty easily at 2 miles without too much fuss. So that's a little bit of the scheme I've been up to, really coming into where I've had a feeling for a little while. It's somewhere between the 200 and the 300 grain projectile does the job well enough to show decent impacts, is consistent. It deals with the wind in a similar fashion, and yet is a lot nicer to shoot in a normal rifle platform, blah, 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 is where the bullet weight, I think, is. And then the amount of energy behind it that it actually needs to get out there in a effective form with a nice to shoot form, all very relevant. That's sort of where I'm leaning into. So I'll get more back to that in a little bit. But in that scheme of things came into what we're messing around with the 300 Win Mag, well, the 300 PRC in that rifle. Now, shot really well. I would qualify as a video recently that the cartridge isn't what makes something very accurate. That's not relevant in my mind. It can make things more consistent, it can make things easier to load, it can be more stable at dealing with pressures or with temperatures, all that sort of stuff. Yes, the cartridge can do, but ultimately the accuracy that we saw in that rifle and the accuracy that any cartridge is going to produce is going to be about the platform. Platform, shooter, conditions, those are the things where the accuracy is. So in that form, that chassis, like I said, from Gareth in that 300 PRC, really nice to shoot with, really stable, really felt really nice. Good big heavy barrel in it, just a standard but trued Remington 700 long action in it. But that shot really well, really happy with it, really consistent, shot really nicely. I was largely shooting the 230 grain burgers in it, but that's the one we actually swapped over and started to shoot the 230, as you see here, the Hornady, which is another thing we did this season, the Hornady A-tips in the 230 and 250 grain. I found actually out of the consistency in the bullets in both those, the 300 Win Mag and the 300 PRC, that the 250s were a little more efficient, obviously high BC, but a little more consistent is what I actually found in shooting that side of things. The 250 was a little more consistent than the 230. And the only thing was in I really had to back off my pressures in the PRC. It really was starting to struggle to try and keep the speed up. I was starting to get not just a tight bolt lift, I could also see it on the primer. I had to back things off. It was starting to push fairly hard. The surprising piece at that point was where the PRC in the lighter bullet was in front of the 300 Win Mag. When we went to the heavier bullet, the 300 Win Mag stepped back up and actually started to overtake. It could run a little more pressure, a little more powder, and also shouldn't say a little more pressure. It could run a little more powder and run a little more speed with less pressure with the same bullet. So, and I suppose a couple of things I've got to dissect to go into that. One is at the moment the A-tips. They are a nice step up in Hornady's case. So they have taken something that, even though it's still a two-piece bullet, so it's still pressed together, and there's definitely some little deformation issues where it goes from the aluminium to the copper jacket. They are still a decent step up from the polymer side of things, and definitely saw it in that case. And whether that's a construction or their 100 consecutive bullets that's made that difference, there is definitely a nice little difference there. There still is some inconsistencies in that aluminium and like that, like I said, that little join. And certainly back down in the 6.5s, the 6.5s were not as consistent by quite a bit in my testing alongside the burgers, but I haven't done enough testing there. Sorry, not the 6.5s. The 6 mils is what I tested, and the 6 mils were not as consistent as the burgers in the 115s. Decently efficient, but quite a bit less consistent. What my summation at the moment is that the processes, the little tiny differences, are really in a similar size, which means that, what am I trying to say there? In the small bullet, those little inconsistencies make a bigger difference than in the larger bullet. And by the time you step right up to the 230 grain, they're only making a little tiny change, so the bullet becomes more consistent because the percentages are different, essentially is what I'm trying to say there. But what it says to me is the bigger it goes, the better it is, so that's what I've found so far. But really, truly, it's too early for me to make any that summation altogether right at the moment. Is just what seems to be the case, so I've got more testing to do. I mentioned the 6.5s because we've just got them, and that is the next test, to go and really compare them alongside the burger, which I found to be very good. And I got the Muzzle, which is also very good. And there's a new one of those we want to test as well. But that's where we're up to on that front. When we come back to this PRC and 300 Win Mag, I suppose I'll tell you what I think's going on there. What I think's going on is that in faster burning powders and faster travelling rounds, so smaller bullet, more powder, the test we did back here, which was the short fatty versus the tall thinny, which was the 6506 versus the 65 gap, we found that there was a marked difference in the short fat one being able to create more speed and run more powder, worked really well. And the tall thin one was restricted. So in the case with the lighter bullet in the 300 Win Mag versus the PRC, that slightly broader column stack of the PRC with the lighter bullet running more speed wins. It's in front of the 300 Win Mag. But I think what happens is that when we get to a point where the bullet has slowed down, the burn rate is slow enough, it's pushing a heavier bullet. So the bullet is the restriction rather than the case, is that then the case thinness isn't a negative anymore because it's not choking or it's not blocking because it can't get out any faster than what the bullet can go. So heavier bullet means you can run a taller, thinner powder stack. So that's just a guess at this moment, but what it says to me and what it sort of wrung out suits something that I've sort of been thinking about for quite a while but never managed to go there. And that is that one there, the 300 rum. Now, the 300 rum isn't that old. I've forgotten if it's the 80s or the 90s, but it's not that long ago that the 300 rum was developed. And to be truthful, it was one that a long time ago, when I went into, well, a fair old while ago, when I went in to buy a 338 Lapua, people said, oh, you shouldn't get them, they're too hard to license in Western Australia, which is one of the weird things we have over here. But the 300 rum, you can go for that. That should be a problem because that's not really an issue. At that stage, it wasn't. But I really looked at all the data and looked at it fairly thoroughly. And what I saw was that for all the extra bang and extra powder and the extra potential barrel wear and that sort of stuff, the 300 rum, I didn't see the advantage. I didn't see the numbers. There just wasn't enough in it to make it work for me. So I had sort of stayed clear through that reason. But it's always rung fairly true from the 338 edges and the bits and pieces that use this case. And the 300 rum as it is, there definitely seems to be a crowd of people that really love them. I could never justify the extra bang versus the little bit of speed. But my feeling is that probably, and this is a guess, this is me spending more of my hard-earned to do another barrel up, but I feel that the negatives are the same as what I was just explaining. When you run too much speed in a narrow case, the case ends up being the restriction. And with the heavy bullet sitting in this, I think they may be a match made in heaven sort of thing. The 250 grain projectile and the 300 rum, I feel, are going to marry very, very well. And just maybe, I don't know, but just maybe get to a point where we have that happy balance. The amount of powder, the weight of the bullet, the size, normal sort of size rifle, and I'm talking probably around a 20-pound rifle, which is still heavy hunting, I get it, but 20 to 22-pound sort of combination. So it's still definitely in the normal precision rifle sort of weight to shoot in a normal semi-tactical sort of form. I think that is going to be very nice to shoot. I think that the amount of energy is going to make that get decent speed behind the 250 grain and really turn into what may be the ideal. A lot of people would say, well, you know, there's the 338 30 cals, and there's which is a 300 Lapua 30. There's the Weatherby's. There's I can rattle off, I can't think of them right now, but I can rattle off a dozen different things that run more powder and are pushing harder on 30 cals, and you could obviously build up custom ones and all the rest of it, or go to the 338 7 mils, and there's all sorts of different ways. But really I'm after an amount of powder that gets, I suppose it's the balance between the amount of recoil and the size of the bullet, so you can still see your impact out there. It's decently efficient bullet, so it's going to still have good, and we're not really talking energy, we're not really trying to be effective out there, but we want to be able to get on and consistently hold down a good group. We want to be able to see our impacts, and we want to be able to shoot it in a platform that is not a 50-kilo monster. So I think, just maybe, this might be a sweet spot. It gives me the excuse to get the 300 rum, which is what I sort of, like I said, I've always looked at it. It's had some attraction to it, but I've never been able to justify it. It hasn't quite worked. And I think the 250, and hopefully, it's rumoured that well, I've heard in various forms that Berger will be coming out with a 245 or a 247 or something like that in a 30 cal, so one to go alongside this. And I think the 300 rum will turn into something really nice in that format. So, as said, that's a test, and we'll see how it goes with that side of things. I should say the logic I'm working with here, which I don't want to be trying to say I've already got my solutions, but I sort of got a fair idea where I'm going, and I really want to prove it and see how it all behaves. But the simple bits of it is that what I already know, and we'll see what it actually comes up like, what we actually show that like, is that the little ones, the 7 mil, the 6, the 5, the 6 mil, even the 300 Win Mag, are easy rifles to shoot. And for that reason, they can still get out there, as we've actually seen. As for how much the conditions affect them versus the 50 or versus the 416 or versus my 375 or the bigger ones, the 338 sort of stuff, there's not that much difference to it. The big difference is that they are, compared to the big ones, easier to shoot, but compared to the big ones, a lot harder to see. So you need really good conditions. You need really good, dry, nice, easy to see conditions. If you don't have those, then the worse you have in the way of conditions, if you're trying to shoot amongst the trees to a little tiny rock face, then you start to get to the really big ones. They are almost always, unless you've got a giant rifle, going to be harder to hold a good group with. But that is outweighed by the fact that you can see stuff. You can actually shoot into the trees and still see things because of the size of the round. And that no round is big enough to see through all conditions. But that's sort of the trade-off. Big enough to see, but small enough to shoot really nicely is the balance I'm at, and that's where I'm starting to talk about this here. Whether that turns into 378 30 Weatherby round or whatever it turns into, who knows? We'll see where that goes, but listen, we'll see what the rum comes up with and see what it actually works like. But that's our strategy, that's how it's going. That's my thoughts on the Hornady rounds and what they're doing. I think there's a good step up. There's some little inconsistencies I'm seeing there, but nothing terrible. And they are visual things that you can look at the bullet and see, and they performed that way. But like a good step up from what their polymer stuff was, so really good. The PRC, great round. I think that really in the normal 200, 215, 220, even the 230s, it's a good thing, and it's actually performing a little bit better than the 300 Win Mag at that level. Would I go out and get a PRC if I already had the 300 Win Mag? Yeah, I probably wouldn't. The 300 Win Mag works really well. You can get good brass for it, and especially for our ELR stuff, using the 230s and then going up to the 250s. Well, it's winning at this place, but early days yet. Too early to make that call. And the 6mm in the gap, the 6.5 and the 6mm. The 6mm's curious to me. It's running more powder and getting more speed without too much pressure. It's functioning really, really well. I'm really surprised at how well that's operating. Barrel life, for sure, it's an issue. If you're trying to shoot it with 80 grains or small bullets, you've got a lot of speed. You're definitely going to burn things out quickly. The way I shoot, the way we use it, that sort of stuff, it still might be an issue, but I don't think it is. But besides that, how nice that thing is to shoot and how consistent that thing was to shoot, I was really surprised how well that little 115 burger in that 6mm worked. Okay, so that's that little gang.
Hi everybody, Sam here. If you like the video and you like what we do, it'd be great to get some support. There's a few ways to do that. Over here, there's a link to a web store which not only has our products, but it has support bits. The money from that goes directly to our channel. And we have our coffee cups. These are $30, they cost us $10. So that's $20 that will go directly into